Okay, so today we're working on a 2007 Dodge Ram 1500 4x4 fuel gauge problem. Fuel gauge reads empty at times and it has a fault code for fuel gauge voltage too high. We're going to have a look at some data. Okay, looking at fuel gauge sending unit data, it shows 5 volts, which would be out of range. So I've moved the wires on top of the fuel tank and nothing changed. And I've checked that connector 135, which is behind the left front wheel, and the connector looks clean and tight. I put some dielectric grease in it, blew it out, but other than dirty and sandy, it's really not corroded. I checked the ground on the fuel pump and it's fine, 0.1 volts running. But here's the odd thing. I'm going to go up and shut this truck off. Watch what happens to the fuel pump voltage. Well, I don't know if you could hear that or not, but with the truck running, it's sitting at 5 volts. I turned the key off, and it drops down to about 4.5, and then a second or two later, it drops down to about 0.5, 0.6 volts, 0.8 actually. You can see it right here, 0.9. But as soon as I start the truck, it jumps back up to 5 volts again, like something is causing a problem. I've, like I said, checked the fuel pump ground, and the ground's not tied to it. Let's have a look at the electrical circuit. Here it is here. Fuel level sensor is dark blue wire, goes through connector. Goes through connector 135 at pin 5, and pin 4 is ground, but they're not tied to the fuel pump. I did check this ground, measuring this voltage here on pin 10, it's like 0.1, so I don't think it's a fuel pump grounding issue. But we're going to put a back pin in pin 5 here and see what the voltage is on the multimeter. Okay, so here's connector 135, conveniently located right behind the left front fender inner skirt in front of the cab mount, clipped to the floor. I've taken that connector apart and looked in it, and looks fine. I've got the yellow lead of my Vantage Pro connected to pin 5, which is the blue-white trace wire which comes from the fuel level sender, and the key is on right now, and it reads 1.87 volts, which I think is what the scan tool is currently showing right now. If we go back to the scan tool here, well, actually the scan tool shows 0.94. But the interesting thing is, as soon as I start this truck up and the fuel pump's running, that's going to change. So I'm going to start the truck. Pause this. So as you can hear, the truck is running now, and I'm watching the voltage on that blue-white wire, pin 5 at C135, which is a fuel sender, and it's running 8 to 9 volts. But yet it goes to a realistic reading if you shut the key off and turn it back on with the engine not running. Strange. Something with the fuel pump maybe? You're going to have to drop the tank. Can't get at the connections on top of the tank. Okay, so we're going to look at engine data, because I was in the instrument cluster data, and we're going to look and see which one of these data lists contains the fuel level. I believe it's going to be the evap one, because the fuel level is an important factor for evap testing. So we'll see if it's in here. There's fuel level sensor there. So you can see it's currently sitting at 1.45, which is not out of range. It doesn't convert that, so it's just a straight voltage. So I'm going to use the bidirectional testing here to command the fuel pump on functional test. Let's see if I can do it in functional tests. Fuel pump relay circuit. And at the same time we're going to change, doesn't give us an option to change the data list. Down. Well, that doesn't help. So I'll have to watch the voltage, because this engine data list that it pulled up as a default with this test does not show the fuel level anywhere in here. So it's a fuel pump relay. You can turn it on and off or toggle it. Well, while that's doing that, we'll take this camera over here and we'll go look and see what's going on with. Well, isn't that special? So I wonder if the fuel pump voltage is bleeding into the fuel sender voltage, because every time the fuel pump is activated, as you can see and hear. So I gotta get that connector on top of the fuel tank to see if there's any corrosion in it. It's like the fuel pump circuit is shorted to the sender circuit. Drop down. Here we are with the tank drop down, and I've got the voltmeter lead in the orange wire, which is the fuel pump feed wire. Key is off, engine is not running, and we'll go over here to the voltmeter, and it's sitting at 10.7 volts. And if I move the voltmeter lead over to the wire beside it, which is the blue wire with the white tracer, which feeds the actual fuel gauge. Okay, so that's the blue wire with the white trace. Although the connector looks clean, dirty on the outside, it looks clean on the inside. And I've got 10.3 volts on that wire. So I've got to short the voltage from somewhere. The interesting thing is the key is off right now. So if I put a resistor box in between pin 4 and 5 at C135, try to get up there, and dial up about 150 ohms resistance. The gauge will show roughly 13 liters of fuel in the tank. And if I turn it down, to roughly 100, that's roughly 100, it's hard to see from the angle, you can see that fuel level drops and the fuel tank now shows 24.5 liters. So the wiring is good to the connector 135. Okay, so I got the tank down, I got the fuel pump toggling back and forth with special functions on the ECM side, and I'm back pinning that connector. Again, the blue wire with the white tracer, which is the fuel pump or not, the fuel level sender voltage, and you can see that it's toggling on and off. I took this connector completely apart up here. There's no salt in it, although it's dirty on the outside, it's pristine and clean in the inside. I took that blue wire out of the connector, and the problem is gone with the wire removed from the connector, but returned again when the fuel pump is being commanded on. So I think it's somehow feeding through in the fuel pump circuit. So back on this 07 Dodge Ram 1500 4x4, it appears that the instrument cluster puts 10 volts on that wire as a bias voltage on the fuel tank sender wire, and it reads at half that value. I've got a 150 ohm resistor in the circuit now, and it reads roughly 2.5 volts. Yet if we look at the live voltage on the meter, it's actually 5 volts. So it reads half of whatever it is. That's what was confusing me. I thought it was a short to voltage, but the 10 volts is a bias voltage that the computer puts on that circuit. So I've got ohmmeter connected between are the two wires to the fuel tank sender, and I've got it set at about 150 ohms, and that makes it read on the scan tool about 14.5 liters remaining in the tank. Interesting. Okay, so now we got the new fuel pump plugged in. We're using the actuator test to run the fuel pump, toggle it on and off, and you can see the voltage is sitting at 3.73 volts steady. I think what was happening is the vibration of the pump running was causing the sending unit to go open, and that's why we were reading 10 volts on it. This pump is not pleasant to change. Whatever, we'll put it back in. So we got the graphing ohmmeter hooked up across the two pins on this fuel pump assembly that connect to the sender and the float inside. You can see the two small blue wires attached to the two middle pins. And if I graph it at the lowest level, it's 223 ohms at empty, and about 20 full. As you can see, it moves nice and smooth. And I had checked the resistance when it was in the vehicle, and it wasn't out of range. That's what led me to believe that I had a problem with the voltage in the circuit. You can see that resistor as I operate the float seems to work just fine. So why was I getting some kind of back feed? So I'm going to move this over to pin 1. I'm not sure if it's pin 1 or pin 4, but the red wire which feeds the fuel pump. So I'm on the red wire that feeds the fuel pump, and it shows over scale, but I'm only on a 400 ohm range, so I'm going to change the resistance range to 4 kilo ohms. And I have 3.35 kilo ohms of resistance. Now it doesn't change when I move the float up and down, but there's really no reason for that pin, that red wire, to be attached unless it's shorted internally inside here, because that red wire feeds the power to the fuel pump, and the brown wire is the ground for the fuel pump. The two blue wires are not attached to it at all, so there's got to be some kind of an internal short or backfeed inside the housing here that's causing the problem that I was having. Oh well, it seems to be fixed now with the new fuel pump assembly.